Are there any substitutes and apologies for today?
Thank you, Convener. We have apologies from Councillors Band, Forbes and McCall, who are substituted by Councillors McEwen, Ahern and Braun, respectively.
Okay. Thank you. Can I also intimate at this point a note on the who's taking the papers this morning, and that I propose to take papers 4, 5, 8 and P1. Councillor Barrett will take papers 7, 10 and 13, and Councillor Stewart will take papers 6, 9 and 11. There was a paper 12 originally in the papers, which was withdrawn and at an early stage and hasn't been deleted in the numbers. Okay, we move on to item 3 on the agenda, which is the minutes. And the minute of the SPNR.
Can I declare an interest, please?
Yep, sorry. Yep, declarations of interest. My apologies for.
Declare a non-financial interest in paper 13 as the Armed Forces and Veterans Champion.
Thank you, Councillor Parrott.
Convener, I think I should probably declare a non-financial interest in paper 11 as a member of the IJB and the Board of NHS Tayside.
Okay.
Convener, a similar non-financial interest in paper 11 as a member of the Integration Joint Board.
Okay, thank you. Any others? No, thank you. Move on to the minutes. Can we approve the minute of the SPNR committee of the 12th of September 18?
Agreed.
Thank you. Right colour. Thank you. Can we note the minute of the property subcommittee of the SPNR committee for the 16th of April 18?
Agreed.
Can we note the minute of the Corporate Health, Safety and Wellbeing Consultative Committee of the 11th of June 18? Can we note the minute of the Employee Joint Consultative Committee of the 28th of May? Thank you. Can we note the minute of the Perth Kinross Integration Joint Board of the 22nd of June? Thank you. And we move on to item 4 on this morning's agenda, which is the Revenue Budget Monitoring Report number 2 for the year. And can I ask Stuart Mackenzie, Head of Finance, to introduce the paper for us, please?
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, Councillors. As set out in Section 2 in Appendices 1 and 2 of the report, the projected net underspend on service budgets is currently £882,000. This reflects movements in both projected expenditure and income, with the main variances set out under each service. In terms of trend, the level of projected service underspend is less than half of that reported at a similar position last year. The committee is requested to note the receipt of additional funding of £626,000, as detailed in Appendix 3, to approve a net transfer of £117,000 to the Capital Fund and to approve service allowance of £149,000 in line with the Building Ambition Report. Proposed movements and reserves are detailed in Section 2.4 of the report. These include adjustments to reflect the delivery of the transformation and cultural programmes, to increase the funding available for the Empty Homes initiative, and to meet £400,000 of the anticipated cost of groundworks at Kinross Primary School. There are a number of movements in corporate budgets, including a projected underspend on the council tax reduction scheme and £300,000 of additional council tax income. The housing revenue account remains break-even, though savings on loan charges will enable increased expenditure on the housing investment programme. Including health and social care, the net projected overspend on the general fund budget is currently £929,000, an increase of £421,000 from a position reported to committee in September. The latest monitoring position for health and social care is detailed in Section 3 and Appendix 5 to the report. The total net projected overspend on health and social care is currently £2.4 million, a movement of £614,000 from the position previously reported to committee. A formal recovery plan has been sought from the Integration Joint Board, and the Chief Executive, Karen Reid, will provide an update. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Stuart. Councillors, the Financial Recovery Plan was received on the 19th of October as requested by both Chief Execs. There has been discussions between both the Chief Execs, and we have asked for further work to be done on the Financial Recovery Plan. It's not yet in a state that it can be agreed by both partner bodies. I do have a telephone conversation this afternoon with my counterpart in NHS Tayside and the chair of the IJB. We're currently looking at the Financial Recovery Plan in the context of both risk and the financial impact on both partner bodies. What I would say to you at this moment in time is it is a projected overspend, and it's important to remember the word projected. We will be convening a further meeting immediately with the Health and Social Care Partnership, both the chair of the IJB, the chief officer, the chief finance officer, the heads of service, both the chief execs of the partner bodies and respective finance colleagues from both organisations. Please be assured that we don't underestimate the significant impact on the council budget emanating from the Health and Social Care Partnership projected overspend, and we're doing all we can to mitigate the risks to the council.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions? Councillor Lane?
Thanks. I know that you say it's a projected overspend, but the projected overspend's risen from the last meeting we had. So are you comfortable that the projected overspend will be for the full term, or is it going to continue in the ascendancy for the before the end of the year, that this projected overspend may not be what the actual overspend is?
Okay, I think that's a matter for the Chief Officer and the Chief Finance Officer to answer.
Thank you, Councillor Lang. I'm going to ask Jane Smith, Chief Finance Officer, to take that question.
Thank you. What I can do today is provide a level of reassurance that the month 7 signed off financial forecast has shown a stabilisation of the financial position, and indeed a slight reduction in the year-end forecast.
Please, yes. As we're moving into winter and there will be probably greater demand, are you still comfortable that this will not rise further?
Thank you. The financial forecast will take into account the seasonal trends and the impact on the level of demand over the winter months. So we do our very best within that forecast to take account of rising demand over the winter months.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Parrott.
Thank you, Convener. I'm on page 36, the bottom bullet point. Can I ask why the additional costs at Bertha Park? What is the nature of those additional costs? And if it's foreseen that they can be recovered from the developer in due course, why is the developer not incurring those costs directly? And why are we having to put up the money in the first place? Thank you.
Down.
Thank you, Convener. The problems in relation to Bertha Park is in relation to utilities. We are carrying out works to allow the site to be serviced, and we expect to recover these from the contractor.
Supplementary?
In the sense that we expect to recover from the contractor?
We will recover. We're in the process of starting a process to recover them from the contractor, but we're confident that we will win that claim.
Okay, so it was unforeseen, is it not covered by contract essentially, but we're happy we'll win it?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you. Right, my mic doesn't seem to be working. Could I ask, and I've asked this question at our previous meeting, but it's just to get clarity for going forward over the next 3 years. It's on 2.1.7, it's on the Pupil Equity Fund, and we've got a carry forward projected of 522,000 That's a fall from the carryover into the current year of last year of what was it? I think some 120,000. But I just want to ask going forward, are we always likely to have this carry forward, or and is that this kind of 3-month lag effect, or will that reduce to any marked degree?
Councillor Donaldson, this is something that we've been looking at very closely, and when we consider that a number of schools have opted to use pupil equity funding to cover staff costs are paid on a monthly basis, so the totality of staff costs will only come off incrementally throughout a period of time, but that we need to predict for the entire staff cost. So if your salary is £80,000 over an academic year, it's £80,000, but as the projections come through, it'll only be the spend that's actually been accrued that will be reflected here. So where there's staff costs, yes, there are always going to be a lag because they're not paid in advance.
Right, just quickly as follow, because we want to ensure that those funds are used for, above all, for improving attainment and life chances for kids. But I think what you're saying is there will probably continue to be this lag effect, but it's likely in the next year, 2 years, 3 years to possibly reduce.
The Pupil Equity Fund comes in a financial year, so it's always out of kilter with an academic year. But within that, so that there's always going to be a bit of a difference there, but within that there's another subtle difference in, you know, in relation to where it's used for staff costs. Those staff costs will come off the total on a monthly basis rather than the total amount of staff costs. The however is that we are recognising, as I've explained previously, that there is some difficulty in spending some of that money, particularly when people are trying to attract different staff. And we've discussed with head teachers, and again as recently as yesterday at the Head Teacher Development Day, about taking an approach that might be over a cluster of schools or indeed at authority-wide level, where the money can be used to benefit those that it's meant to be benefit, but can be spent slightly differently. So rather than leaving the responsibility to each individual school, looking for economies of scale of spend and of recruitment that can be done centrally to support that.
Thank you, and clearly you're adapting to circumstances.
Thank you. Councillor McEwan.
With respect to Appendix 5 regarding health and social care, it appears to me that all the underspends are related to staff not being in post, and that should the Health and Social Care Partnership be able to employ all the people it needs, that actually the overspend will be greater than is currently reported in this.
Thank
you. Is
you.
that a fair reflection?
Mr. Packham.
Thank you. Yes, we do have a series of vacancies in our system, and in order to give you some of the detail on that, I'll ask Diane Fraser if she would explain some of the staffing issues that we face within social care. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. As discussed previously, in terms of recruitment to social care, it's a challenge both locally and nationally, particularly around our care at home services and also within our more specialist services where we're looking for particular skills. However, we will take that into account into our financial planning in terms of how we progress that.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Hearn.
Thank you, Convener. It's a question on page 36, one of the bullet points. Can I ask why the taxi contract values were omitted from the anticipated pressures?
Sorry, could you repeat that, Councillor Hearn?
Yes, one of the bullet points on page 36,
yep.
With regards to homeschool transport. Why were taxi contract values omitted from the anticipated pressures?
Thank you for your question. You know, you will be aware that, you know, we also reported an issue last SPNR in regard to tendered services for public transport. The process for tendering for all of our public transport and taxis took place last year, and unfortunately there was just an additional error, you know, made, and that's what we're showing here.
All of the work, the taxis were, sort of tendered properly. It's just, unfortunately, the cost of it wasn't added up properly, and we're having to declare that, obviously, for transparency.
Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Convener. I wanted to ask a question regarding Appendix 5 on page 57, and that was with regard to the care at home demand overspend. I wondered if the Chief Officer could tell us what is being done by the Integrated Joint Board to address the issues of demand and also presumably the issues of a care home or care at home labour force. And could they also explain what the £45,000 provider retainer fee project is about?
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Yes, there is a relentless increase in the demand for care at home, and we know through some of the work that's been done elsewhere in the country and some of the work we're doing ourselves that adopting a rehabilitation approach will help people to remain independent for longer. So in our planning, we are looking at how we are going to strengthen that, bringing together our reablement and our rehabilitation teams to have a much more assertive impact upon the aging population so that we can reduce the time that they will require the support of care at home. In terms of the £45,000 figure, I'm going to have to defer to my colleague Diane Fraser to discuss that. Thanks very much.
Thank you. The retainer fee is our attempt to ensure that providers retain the care package that they have when somebody goes into hospital. So that has been successful in some areas. We're still working with providers to manage that demand.
Thanks. It's back to the point that Councillor McEwen made, and I think I'll take my take on what his question was and see if we can get an answer to it. The question was that the underspends, the budget's still well overspent, but the underspends are all on staff slippage, i.e. we don't have people in post. If these people were in post, the overspend would obviously be far higher. So I think to use it as a sort of, to bring the overspend down, the fact that we're not actually got people doing the job to provide the best service for the people of Perth and Kinross is a worrying way to try and get a budget in balance.
I'll leave officers to answer that one, Councillor Lane, but it's not necessarily just a direct balance. There may be other factors in it. Mr. Packham?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Lang. I mean, I think the logic of your argument is sound. However, we are having to factor in what the overall workforce requirement will be in order to achieve a balance between the demand and our capacity. Now, this isn't simple, simply because of what I described before. If you consider how a rehabilitation workforce could stave off the demand for care at home, how we, in supporting carers at home, could reduce that demand for paid care, etc. Under the Carers Act, we have obligations to look at that too. So in our planning for the coming years, we're trying to factor this in as best we can. However, what we know is that a certain proportion of the population is going to require care, and we are seeing those aging population of people rising, as was described when we last spoke about this. So thank you for your question. It is an assertion that we're very aware of. And in an ideal world, if we were able to employ everyone, we would see delays in other parts of the system, savings in other parts of the system, and overall the purpose of integration would be seen to be far more successful than it is at the moment, because sometimes the costs of not having care at home are played out in other parts of the system, whether it be acute care or whether it be people who are stuck in intermediate care placements because they cannot get the care package that they require.
Thank you very much. Councillor Purvis.
Thank you, Convener. Could I ask about 2.1.9 on page 37, specifically the roads and transport and the increase in the projected underspend for the 20 mile an hour limit zones, the expansion of rural footpaths and cycle networks and unadopted roads. I just wanted to ask in terms of process, if this underspend continues, and those monies that were specifically allocated for those projects. I know obviously we would look at budget flexibility if there was any towards the end of the financial year, but would it be possible for these monies to be allocated, put into reserves, earmarked for that purpose, so that they continue to be spent on the priorities for which they were originally allocated, and how that would happen, whether that would be through a monitoring report or at the specific service committee.
Okay, thank you. Mr Mackenzie.
Thank you, Convener. Thank you, Councillor Puff, for the question. The money could certainly be transferred into reserves and earmarked for the purpose. The state, and that could be done as part of a revenue monitoring process at this committee, or it could be reflected in the reserve support to Council in February. But there is a mechanism for carrying the money forward.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? Thank you. Once again, I'd like to place on record my thanks to the officers across the whole of this council for their continued excellent management of our finances. The paper sets out a projected overspend of 929,000, and the head of finance has provided an explanation for the main reasons underlying this position. The Chief Executive also set out the latest position with regards to Perth Kinross Health and Social Care Partnership. It goes without saying that we will keep this under review as we move forward, and we will work with colleagues in the NHST side to achieve the best possible outcome given the current circumstances. Can I also remind all elected members that many of the figures included in this revenue monitoring report are at this stage only projections, and they will undoubtedly be revised as the financial year progresses. I am confident that our reputation for strong and prudent financial management will continue to place the Council in a healthy position, and I look forward to receiving further updates as we move through the year. I'm happy to move the paper. Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Convener. In seconding you, I want to say that Perth and Kinross Council has a long and strong record of sound financial management, good governance and robust and transparent budgeting monitoring arrangements. This is further evidenced with the projected underspends in education and children's services, housing and environment, and corporate and democratic services. I note in the report the Council's positive response to dealing with the extensive and unbudgeted expenditure in applying £600,000 through environment and reserves to the Kinross Primary School stabilisation works required to make the playground and building safe by removing unstable quarry wall material and vegetation, and look forward to the completion of those works in the new year, and I'm happy to second. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. The gross budget for the 10-year composite programme is currently estimated at £608.7 million, which is a small increase of £229,000 over the position reported in September. Section 3 of the report summarises progress to date of the composite programme. Net expenditure to the 31st of October is approximately £21.3 million, or 41% of the budget, which is a little lower than comparable spend at this time last year. There are a number of proposed adjustments to service capital budgets for expansion under the Early Learning and Childcare Programme, for refurbishment works along Forgan Primary School, for the rephasing of works at Perth Academy, for compensation events in relation to the A9-A85 Road Junction project, and for the rephasing of expenditure on the Prudential Borrowing Programme and Letham Hub, amongst others. All of these adjustments are reflected in Appendices 1 and 2 to the report. Section 4 and Appendix 3 sets out progress of the Housing Investment Programme. The budget for the 5-year programme is currently estimated at just under £73.2 million, having been enhanced by £1.3 million from the sale of shared equity housing in Blairgowrie. It is proposed to apply this funding to the bathroom modernisation programme to support adaptation works enabling tenants to remain in their own homes. Net expenditure to the 31st of October on the housing programme is £9.8 million, or 50% of the budget, which is comparable to this time last year. Since preparing a report, the Tasty's deal has now been signed, and I would ask Jim Valentine to update the committee.
Thank you, Convener. Councillors, the signing of the Tay City deal last Thursday was only the end of the first stage of the process, moving named projects such as the City Hall, Perth West and the Aviation Academy to the final business case stage prior to the release of funding. The deal, however, has rolled up some of our projects into broader programmes, and the detail of these will need to be discussed with our partners through the Joint Committee over the coming weeks and months. As regards our transport projects, we welcome the investment in Perth Bus and Rail Station and look forward to hearing the detail around the regional collaboration to be put in place to allow projects like the Cross-Tay Link Road to be developed and delivered. Both governments have chosen to invest some of the monies into areas which were not in the original deal document. For the Perth and Kinross area, these are specifically £1 million into supporting rural broadband beyond the current R100 programme, and further monies for developing 5G test beds. These two digital projects sit alongside new funding for the development of the plastic recycling beacon project. As I said at the beginning, this deal still has a long way to go in terms of negotiations and final approvals by the Joint Committee, but I am happy to try to answer any questions members might have.
Thank you, Convener. My question relates to the compensation events on the A9, A85 road junction. This is paragraph 3.3.4. I note towards the bottom of that on page 68, it says that there's a proposal to take 2.3 million from the structural maintenance budget to cover these compensation events. What is that 2.3 million as a percentage of the total structural maintenance budget for the current financial year? I'm keen to get an idea of how much of our overall structural maintenance budget is being allocated to cover this event. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr Mackenzie?
Thank you, Convener. I'm trying to do the arithmetic. Councillor Bailey, with due respect, can I come back to you? If you can allow me some time just to get hold of the right appendix and a calculator, I'll be able to answer your question. Thank you. Apologies.
Certainly, thank you.
One of my colleagues is about to bail me
Happy to answer that. Yeah, the 10-year structural maintenance programme is £100 million, so it's 2.3 million against the 100 million.
2.3%.
23%. 23% of the yearly number if we're dividing it down. Okay.
Convener, it was asked in the current financial year, not in the 10-year plan, so I think it'll be slightly different percentage. Could you? It's 23%, not 2.3, which is
not only if it's a
prorate, which it is.
Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. We have, in terms of the appendix, the £2.3 million has been taken off year 10 in the programme, so we'll look to revisit that and rephase over the 10-year period.
Thank you. I think we got there.
Okay,
thank you.
Got that. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Convener. My question is on page 67, 3.2.7, in relation to Perth Academy. Could I get an assurance that the full review of the scope and works required will include the options for a new build for the Perth Academy campus or school?
Councillor McCall, as you know, we've been looking at the planned repairs and maintenance and the refurbishment programme, and we're currently at the point through the capital budget setting process that there's discussion about the school estate more broadly and whether we would continue with an ongoing refurbishment or whether alternative options would be included. And we're keen to make sure that what we have obviously is a best value approach to making sure that the money is spent to best effect. And so if that is about looking at consideration of alternatives to simply just refurbishment, then that's what we would be doing.
So for the avoidance of doubt, may I pass a supplementary for me? So for the avoidance of doubt, the alternatives will include consideration of a new build or rebuild?
It would include all options, yes.
Yeah. Okay, any further questions? Councillor Donaldson?
Page 68, 3.36 and in particular 3.38. First of all, 3.38, I'm glad that the Brock Road project now looks likely to be completed by May 2019, and let us just hope there's no further hold-ups with Scottish Gas Networks. But it's on 3.38 because it states it's maybe not a large amount, but this is potentially such a major community asset for Strathern that a third party, that Sustrans has now funded £45,000 for the design work on the path network. Is that indicative of the fact that agreement has now been reached with the landowners and other parties on the route of the path and on the timing and on the surface and other issues?
Okay. Thank you for your question. Well, work is ongoing in terms of, all the owners with, but I don't know the definitive position on that, Councillor Donaldson, but so I will come back to you if that's all right.
I would be grateful because it is such a key issue for locally and just in terms of amenity for people in Crieff and Comrie. Thank you. Grateful.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? Well, sorry, Councillor McKeon. It's just on the periphery of my vision at both ends. So that's
no problem. Thank you very much. Page 71 and 72 discusses the Blackthorn Place development where we introduced shared equity. And I give a bit of clarity for myself as well as a question that there's a disposal proceed of 1.255 million from those sales, and that money is now being used to advance bathroom modernisations for people who need to stay in their own home and give more burden to the health and social care side of things. Is that something we're going to want to repeat going forward within this council so that we can actually generate income to improve our housing stock even more?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the question. Yes, in terms of shared equity, it's something that we would be looking at our local housing plan, and be bringing forward proposals as and when, that it suits the development, but also fits in with, the actual area as well.
Okay, thank you. Okay. This report provides a summary of the continued excellent progress towards the delivery of our ambitious capital project. Officers across the Council continue to roll out record levels of capital investment in our assets and infrastructure. The Head of Finance provided elected members with an overview earlier this morning. The committee will be aware that the heads of terms for the Tay Cities deal was signed last week, and the Deputy Chief Executive has also provided an update. This is a significant landmark in our collective ambition for the whole of the Tay Cities area, and I look forward to working with all our partners to deliver on this huge investment going forward. I also look forward to reporting the progress on the Tay Cities deal to future meetings of this committee. I'm happy to move the paper. Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Convener. I think it's worth noting the £12 million a year-to-date expenditure within the Housing Investment Programme, which is delivering more homes and warmer homes for people in Perth and Kinross. It has delivered 20 new houses in Scone and Milnathort and is delivering new houses in Blackthorn Place, Blairgowrie, and 32 homes at Crieff Road in Perth. We have spent £4.5 million this year already and are on track to invest a total of more than £9.5 million in the fabric of our tenants' homes, in modern, efficient central heating systems, in triple glazed windows, in energy efficient external fabric, kitchens and bathrooms, delivering better homes for people to live in and supporting jobs and employment in Perth and Kinross. The report also proposes to apply £1.25 million to the bathroom modernisation programme, specifically to deliver work such as wet rooms and level access bathrooms arising from occupational therapy referrals, which enable people to remain in their own homes when their ability and mobility declines. Housing is the foundation for the best start in life, for healthy lives and enabling our children to reach their potential in a stable family environment. And that's what lies behind the dry tables and figures in the report. But if you want to see the human story, or if you haven't already seen the video that the Council prepared to mark Scottish Housing Day in the International Year of Young People, which we showed at the Housing and Communities Committee last month, That just shows exactly what the new homes mean to local families and spells out in the authentic words of young kids what it means to them too. So I would recommend that people watch that on YouTube. Thank you.
Okay, happy to agree the paper. Thank you. Move on to item 6. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Convener. This is a report on the Rural Perth and Kinross Microenterprise Fund and Microcredit Fund. The report updates committee on the proposed Rural Microenterprise Fund and Micro Loan Fund, Microcredit Fund. There was a budget motion allocated, which allocated funding in the 2018-19 and 2019-20 budgets for a Rural Business Property Fund at £100,000 in each of those 2 financial years, and £100,000 in 2019-20 for a microfinance project. Today's report seeks to develop those ideas by creating a comprehensive business grants scheme targeted at small rural businesses and community enterprise projects. Currently, no funding is available to directly support businesses through the Council's economic development budgets. The Council has, in the past, established grant funds to support business developments, which have proved very popular with the local business community. The proposal is to widen the scope of the previously proposed Rural Business Property Fund to establish a new Rural Micro Enterprise Fund to support micro businesses, social enterprises and constituted community organisations, those employing less than 10 employees, and the fund will support them to invest in projects which will make a positive economic impact on their businesses and on the wider local economy. The report also seeks approval to establish a microloan fund giving out small loans to similar businesses. Due to restrictions, however, placed on us by the Financial Conduct Authority, it is proposed that this fund would be outsourced to a suitable organisation to run the microcredit fund on our behalf. I think we can take questions now. We will start with Councillor Dugan's hand was just up first.
Thank you very much, Vice Convener, and let me start by saying how much I welcome this, and my apologies if it seems confrontational, but I welcome in the most part the fact that this bears very little resemblance to the motion that came before Council originally for the Rural Business Property Fund. And my first question is around that, Vice Convener, can I ask for assurance from officers that it's competent to have something that's so substantially different from the original motion?
Mr. Valentine.
I'd like to say that I hope it is, so that we can advance this today.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Thank you, Councillor Dugan. Yes, we're confident that it is competent, that it stacks up with the principles that were established in the budget motion.
Okay, Vice Convener, thank you. I've got a couple of supplementaries, if I could. The first one is that there remain, in my view, a number of substantial shortcomings in the paper that is before us today. I'd be very interested to... I note that consultancy is something that can be paid for through the fund. I'd like to find out from officers if they think it's okay that there's no conditions attached to consultancy. I'd like very much to see that any consultancy work paid for through this fund would be for consultants that were members of professional bodies, not just somebody that can issue a receipt for consultancy works.
Mr. Valentine.
Thank you, Vice Convener. I think we would have to be satisfied that it was a bona fide body, but as with all these small sums of money, which are ostensibly going to a lot of community ventures, we'll want to give as much leeway as possible to allow people to access the funding, but it would have to be proper checks carried out in terms of following the public pound, as there would with any other expenditure.
Okay.
Thank you. Your second supplementary, Councillor.
Yeah, just finally, Vice Convener, I'm heartened rather to see the exclusion from the fund of betting shops. I'd like to know if there's any officers in here who would support, therefore, by omission, the inclusion of off-sales of alcohol, who could similarly benefit from this fund by the fact that they're not omitted from it or precluded from it. So I wonder if officers would support licensed off-sales premises being supported by this fund.
Mr. Valentine?
That would be for elected members to consider. There wouldn't be anything, I don't think, that would preclude us from including licensed premises.
Okay, thank you, Vice Convener. Exclusion of licensed. Sorry, Convener? Sorry, just for clarity. For clarity, I would like to see, as well as betting shops being precluded, I would like to see licensed off-sales premises or licensed grocers precluded also.
Okay.
Councillor Braun, your question.
Sorry,
Thank you.
Councillor Stewart. I would be happy to agree that. Jim?
Sorry, can we just be clear? We would need to see a proposal so we could check the wording of the proposal and just make sure that we could actually put that in place.
Okay. We'll speak to that later.
Just a question, sorry, from me, Councillor Dugan. Perth Kinross is rightly proud of its food and drink industry. Are you proposing, or is your request directed at producers of drinks which would be sold in off-licence premises?
Yeah, off-licence premises, Vice Convener. I think the business development of off-sales of alcohol is not something that this council would seek to encourage, as distinct from on-sales, which tends to be a much more discerning and less hazardous in terms of public health.
But not the producers of those?
Not producers,
goods.
no.
Okay.
Off-sales.
Councillor Braun.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Just two questions, if I may. Firstly, on page 96, that's the Microcredit Loan Fund, section 2.4. We're obviously going to have to outsource the running of this. Do we have any idea of the mechanics of how that would work with an outside body?
Yes, officers have been in discussion with external bodies, but perhaps Mr. Valentine would like to, or Mr. Mackenzie would like to explain that further.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart, and thank you, Councillor Bond, for your question. Essentially, there are restrictions on the granting of loans imposed by the Financial Conduct Authority for understandable reasons. So what we propose to do is work with an external partner body, most likely a community organisation, and draft a service level agreement in terms of understanding, in terms of outcomes, in terms of expectation, and in terms of reporting and monitoring. So that would be the proposed mechanics. They would look for some benefit from that, I would anticipate, but those discussions are ongoing.
The second question, if I may.
Councillor Braun.
It's just on Appendix 1 regarding the payment method of the Micro-Enterprise Fund. It says on receipt of paid invoices. It just seems to me that if a small business is looking for a grant, to actually pay, if they're looking for a grant of say £8,000 or £10,000, it seems to me that they might find it difficult to pay that initially and then wait for the money to come in. Would it not be easier perhaps if the invoices were sent to the council to pay out? Is there a legal restriction there, I wonder?
Mr. Valentine. Mr. Mackenzie.
Apologies, Councillor Bond. I wasn't entirely following your comment. Could I just ask you to clarify?
The statement says payment is on receipt of paid invoices. We pay the grant out when we get the paid invoices in. And my point was a small business may have difficulty, if they want a grant of £10,000, for example, may have difficulty in finding that £10,000 to pay initially before they get the reimbursement from the council. And I was just wondering whether perhaps it would be easier if the invoices were sent to us for payment. We know that the payment's gone to the right people. And that takes the burden off the small business then.
I think what we try and avoid would be a prepayment, effectively, a payment in advance of confirmation that the conditions of the funding offer have been reached. Beyond that, I think we can look at mechanisms for making that payment. But that would be the thing we'd try and avoid, because that's the guarantee to elected members and indeed to the wider community that the conditions of the grant have been met.
Thank you. Thank you, Vice Convener.
The Chief Executive would like to come in on that, and then we've got a couple of questions over there.
Thank you, Councillor Braun. I think there would be specific governance issues if we were to do what you're describing. We also need to be careful in terms of our auditor's position on that, so I don't think it would be an acceptable use of public money.
Thank you.
Councillor Parrott and then Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Vice Convener. two questions, if I may. The first relates to paragraph 2.3, where you mention a grant rate of up to 90% being available. Is that not a little too high in the sense of having sufficient buy-in from the recipient? And would a lower grant rate of perhaps 50% not be more appropriate in terms of securing the buy-in of the person in receipt of the grant? And secondly, can I ask if, with regard to, perhaps the proposal is not sufficiently far advanced yet, but with regard to the Microcredit Loan Fund, is it intended that the 3 city wards be excluded from that as well as the grant fund? Thank you.
Mr. Valentine.
To answer the last one first, I think the Microcredit Loan Fund was about the entire area. As regards the percentage, that was the indicative percentages that officers were working towards. If there was any variation on that, it would be for the committee to decide if they wanted to vary those percentages.
Just to clarify the first answer to that, from the budget motion, I'm pretty certain that the Microcredit Fund came under the heading of Rural Economic Development, so yeah, it would preclude the city wards, if I'm right, Mr. Valentine.
I'll double check that, Councillor Stewart. I may have made an error, but I'll check that.
Thank you. Have we got any more questions? Oh, sorry, Councillor Donaldson was next, and then we've got Councillor McEwen and Councillor Shard.
Can I just say, like Councillor Dugan, I welcome both these funds, but I do have some concerns. I think my main one in particular is this. I'd like an answer. You mentioned the budget motion. That was back in February. We're 8 months down the road, but we are where we are. But it's only 4 months until the end of the current financial year. That leaves 4 months for people to apply in respect of 2018-19. So can I ask what the deadline for applications will be? And secondly, how long people can draw down on those funds? And the third point as well, I'm thinking about it more on the Microcredit Loan Fund, is with the Financial Conduct Authority is the question of a £100,000 fund for both years is compliance costs, licensing charges and such like. Will it, much as I like to see it happen, will it be value for money?
Mr. Mackenzie.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. Can I just address, perhaps, because it's the one that's most current in my mind, in terms of compliance costs? So we are seeking to enter into discussions with a local organisation which already has registration with the Financial Conduct Authority. So the compliance costs would not fall on the council in that respect. Maybe I just leave it at that point, perhaps. So that's perhaps address that. In terms of the resources, again, turning to the Microcredit Loan Fund, in the budget motion, that money is allocated as part of a provisional 1920 budget. So that fund could not be established until Council has set the 1920 budget in February of this year. In terms of the Rural Fund, that money is spread between 1819 and 1920, and any underspend could be carried through reserves or budget flexibility into the following year.
On that fund, even if none of that 100,000 is drawn down, it can be carried over in total into the next year.
Yes, if Council decides to do that, yes.
Councillor McEwen.
Thank you very much. On the back page of the report, it talks about how grants may be repayable if businesses cease trading. Does this not give us a circumstance where somebody could open up a barber's, get a loan, do up the shop front, go out of business, and the owner of the shop itself that was the previous business had rented off of is then benefited from the shop being done up, but actually doesn't have to pay the loan back? So there's actually an element of risk and fraud possible through that mechanism.
Just to be clear that we're not, in this case, talking about the, it's not about paying the loan back, it's about paying the grant back, but if Mr. Mackenzie would like to address the governance issue around that.
Thank you. essentially, we'd be, in terms of the grant, we'd be looking to put monitoring arrangements in place which would avoid that situation arising, Councillor McKeown. There hasn't been that experience in similar schemes that the council's operated in the past, but that doesn't preclude the risk, and we'd look to manage the risk through the governance arrangements.
I suppose what I'm asking is that the shop owner doesn't own the asset of the shop, but we're giving them a grant to improve that asset when that asset belongs to somebody else. Surely that is a risk of us increasing the value of somebody's asset without them having a liability to pay the grant. I know I've asked the same question in a different way, but I didn't get an answer the first time.
Ms. Mackenzie?
Can I intervene just for a second? I'm sure the leasee of a property is entered into a contract with the owner of that property, and that's a legally binding contract. You mentioned in your first question about fraud. If they were to desist from that contract and walk away with the grant money, which is what you're implying, I think in your question, then that would be a fraudulent act, and it would be subject to a police investigation at that point. Not too sure about your analogy with a barber, giving you and Mr. Mackenzie as the two questions.
That's not what I mean. I'm not meaning that I'm not implying that somebody walks away with the money. I'm implying that the money gets used for the purpose it was granted for, and increasing the livery or the attractiveness of the property, the asset. But the person who's applying for the grant to do that does not own that asset. They're only renting that asset on contract. If they then cease to trade and go out of business, go bankrupt, then that person has no responsibilities, and the asset goes back to the person who owns the property to rent it out to somebody else. My suggestion is that that then owner of the building has benefited from a grant that they do not have to pay back.
Councillor McKeown, the Chief Executive, would like to come in.
Thank you. Councillor McKeown, I think you raise a very valid point. Can you leave this with officers to look at the criteria and come back to you? But thank you for raising that. You happy to come in? Thank you.
Mrs. Simpson.
I think the two distinct points is the grant arrangement would be with the grant recipient. So clearly the first test would be whether or not they were eligible to receive that grant. And then we would look at how that grant payment was managed and monitored. And then in terms of the circumstances, we would similarly look to the arrangements with that grant to see whether or not there was any recourse for us to recover any monies. The fact that it might be used to ultimately benefit an additional owner who receives a benefit from that asset isn't really part of that legal arrangement. And it may well be that this is actually quite a common situation if you have people who are renting premises to start up the very businesses that this council is seeking to try and support. And I'm afraid that that's actually just the risk that the council is taking on to manage that in terms of grant payments to promote this initiative. What we would be doing is making sure that where we can put in place a framework for effective budget, for effective monitoring, for effective governance, making sure that they fulfil the eligibility criteria in the instance and there's been no misappropriation or misuse. That's about as many safeguards as legally we can put in place to be able to support initiatives such as this.
Okay, Councillor McKeown. Councillor Shars.
Thank you. My question was on 2.5. It refers to our community planning partners, and I just wanted some information about discussions that would be had with them, particularly organisations like GrowBiz, which will have quite a lot of experience in these sort of businesses that this would be targeted at.
Okay, I was going to address specifically the point about GrowBiz when I was moving the paper, if that's okay. I'll come back to you at that point. Councillor Lane.
Thanks. My original question's been answered, but the other debate has led me to other questions. I'd like officers to really look at the point raised by Councillor McEwen. A lot of our rural towns, a lot of the shop premises are owned by 1 or 2 or 3 landlords, and the problem I could see with this is that if the circumstances happen that a shop is done up to a great extent and then somebody does go into liquidation and it reverts back to landlord, the price then that the landlord charges makes it more difficult for the next new business to come in. So it may have a negative effect on businesses. So that's, I would like you to, if you, that could be taken back and checked, because it could actually have a negative effect on the new businesses starting up. So that's one question, if that could be looked at. The other question is the Microcredit Fund, will there be administration fees if a third party is administrating the grant? And the final question was for clarity on the off-sales point. Were you willing to accept that into the paper, that, Councillor Dugan's point, that off-sales where no production of spirit or alcohol takes place, that there would be no, that they would be exempt from being able to apply for the grant? It was just for clarity if you were accepting that or not.
Okay, can I get Mr Mackenzie to answer the second point, first of all?
I would do so, Councillor Stewart. Thanks for the question, Councillor Lane. I would expect so, would be the answer, short answer to your question. But that would be part of the discussions. And again, working with community groups, I think there's a degree of flexibility on that point. But I would expect it to be an administration cost.
And the cost of legal fees to sign up for the grant to cover, would that be borne by the council or part of the grant?
The value of grants in terms of the loans fund, the value of loans would be relatively small. They would be non-secured loans, so there wouldn't really be any legal fees in those. In terms of the grant, any costs in administering a grant would come from the council.
Have we got any other questions? Oh, sorry, I'll come back to you on that point. Yes, I think it would be appropriate to ask our head of legal and governance to clarify whether we can include the restriction on off-sales. And I think in moving the paper, I'll suggest that we also ask officers to look into a scheme to indemnify the Micro-Enterprise Fund against the situation that Councillor McEwen was describing, if that's all right. Are there any other questions? Mrs Simpson.
Yeah, I think what we would actually need is clarification as to what council was seeking to exclude from that, because if you're just staying off licence, that also includes your small gift shops who sell whiskey, miniatures and things like that, because they all come within the licensing regime. So I think council would need to think about exactly what it was they wanted to exclude from that, so that we can then build that in.
Councillor Dugan.
I think we know the types of off-sales we're talking about, and I'm very happy to take the assurance from yourself, Vice Convener, and then work with you and officers to highlight just, or to narrow down exactly what we're talking about, especially as Councillor Lang points out, you know, to include all artisanal alcohol enterprise and things like that. So there's no question about any of that. So we can clarify that after committee, and I'm grateful for that being included in your motion.
Yeah, just to clarify, we're talking about types of off-sale grocers rather than gift shops, artisanal producers and so on. Okay, any other questions on the report? Okay then, so I just want to summarise then and move the paper formally, by saying that in particular the creation of the Microcredit Fund was a direct result of discussions that Councillor Purvis and I held with GrowBiz, Councillor Shires, in relation to the kinds of support that small and micro businesses need in our rural areas, and that GrowBiz, I'm certain, stands ready to provide the GrowBiz in particular, or for example, stands ready to provide the necessary mentoring and advice that may be required by such businesses. So with the I just also want to say that this administration is committed to supporting our rural economy, and I believe this whole council is committed to supporting our rural economy. Many people living in our rural areas commute elsewhere to work, but we also want to ensure that people have the option of well-paid, high-skilled work without always needing to travel out with their local area. These funds are designed to help people get new business ideas off the ground, as well as helping current small businesses to grow. And for every new job created or small business that can expand as a result of accessing these funds, that will also help to protect existing jobs and businesses in our small rural towns and villages. I'm delighted to be able to bring these proposals forward to committee and look forward in future to visiting local businesses that have benefited from them. With the provisos that I outlined earlier in terms of the conditions that we will instruct officers to look at, are we happy to agree this paper? Councillor Purvis, you've got a comment.
I'd just like to add to what Councillor Stewart has said about the Microcredit Fund, which I very much welcome. Microcredit has been something that has been used extensively in the developing world in recent years, and with great success. Examples in Bangladesh, Grameen Bank, which has a 99% repayment rate. But the point about the microcredit is that the small amounts of money can make the real difference to these small... Shall I wait until you've...
Yeah, sorry, Councillor Stewart hasn't got a seconder yet. I was waiting to see if
Oh.
you were seconding the paper, but clearly you're just making a comment, so sorry. We need to have the paper.
Councillor Purvis, if you'd like to second the paper, that's fine. Carry on, please.
I'll start again. In seconding this report, I think it's microcredit is something that has, as I said, has been extensively used in the developing world, where the repayment rates have been very high, because these small amounts of money can make the real difference. They can be a barrier, whether it's a piece of equipment or whatever it is. A small amount of money can allow the expansion to take place. But in terms of the things that have been put in place when these microcredit funds have been used in these developing countries, things like group lending and support have all been used and have been attributed to the reasons why there's such a high repayment rate. But the evidence suggests that actually it's the support which makes the difference to the high levels of the repayment of these funds, and not necessarily some of the other things that are taken into account. So actually working with organisations like GrowBiz and others that can provide that support to these local businesses is crucial to the success of this fund, and I think that's very important when we're looking to develop this, that's not forgotten, because I don't think it will be as successful as it could be if we were to fail to make use of these organisations that are able to provide that support.
And you're happy to second? Oh, yeah, okay, thanks. So, thank you, Councillor Purvis. You had a comment, Councillor Dugan.
Yeah, it's a comment, and I'd like to move an amendment, if I could, Vice Convener. I think what we've done is discussed the merits and concerns of this fairly thoroughly, and I hope in a positive way. It seems to me, though, that it is a fairly limited pot, and the maximum possible award is a substantial element of that pot, and thereby potentially limiting that which we could do. So therefore, I would move that the maximum grant available under the grant scheme alone, that's the sole element of my amendment, is that the maximum grant is £5,000, thereby doubling the number of potential interventions you can make with the same fund.
Well, first of all, it's a competent amendment. Do you have a seconder, Councillor Dugan? I would start from that. I presume Councillor Lane will be happy to second you.
Oh, you don't know me very well. But in this case, yes.
Given all appearances, I would assume that Councillor Lane's happy to second you. As far as that's concerned, I think the principle of the fund is still the same, and I would be happy to incorporate that in the paper today.
Thank you very much.
Yep, we're happy to accept the amendment. Are there any other comments? Councillor Lane, you've got a comment.
Yes, a comment. Just to thank you for accepting that. I think if it gives opportunity to up to 20 businesses now, although it could have been more, but 20 could get the maximum. I think that's it's good.
20 per year, in actual fact, 40 in total, because it's £100,000 over 2 years.
And I'd also like to say that we will review this going forward, because it's a positive thing, and we'll keep it under review. Yeah.
Any other comments, or can we agree the paper and move on? Thank you.
Thanks, Convener. Item 7 on our agenda is the Transformation Programme update on Phase 4 of the Transformation Programme, and the Deputy Chief Executive will introduce the paper.
Thank you, Vice Convener. This report gives an update on Phase 4 of the Transformation Programme, which reports on 16 current live projects. It gives an overview of the progress to date and identifies those on target and those with issues and or risks which have been managed by project boards and reported as appropriate to the Corporate Transformation Board. We have progressed projects previously reported as requiring remedial action, such as the review of catering services and the option for a central production unit. This project, which is dependent on all three councils working together to agree a timetable for the work required and the resource allocation to support this, will report progress early in the new year. The Council's Assets for Commercial Sponsorship project has reviewed the feasibility of using all assets previously identified and will concentrate initially on assets with known market interest. As a result of this, the income generation target has been reviewed, and this will be updated in the December report. An in-house process to support the current process has been developed, which is due to go live in January. The Corporate Property Asset Management Review, as you will be aware, is now subject to a separate report, which follows on from this one. The paper also recommends the allocation of funding for the new Cultural Trust Transformation Project and notes two further new projects agreed in April 2018 yet to come online for reporting to SPNR, sponsorship of events and low carbon energy production. An overview of progress with the Tayside Collaborative project and the agreed prioritised approach to this work is noted, and further information regarding this work will be brought back to committee at a future date. Happy to take any questions.
Do we have any questions? Councillor Purvis.
Could I ask a question on the on page 113, the council assets for commercial sponsorship, and obviously there are various issues around that. Can I just ask generally, what type of things have we been looking at, and why has that not been successful thus far?
I think we've been looking at things like roundabouts. We've been looking at things like the council's fleet, commercial vehicles, as well as I think what are called the grey vehicles as well. I wonder whether Barbara Renton can expand on that.
No, that's, sort of where we've been looking at any asset where we could sell the space, so we've been quite successful in relation to roundabouts, not so successful in terms of anything else, although we have been working with our schools and our head teachers, about, advertising, within the school arena as well, and whether that could bring additional income in.
And have we been restrictive in terms of what we've been, say, on the fleet, what we would allow to be advertised on that? Because other local authorities and other organisations seem to be able to sell space and buses and things like that. I struggle to understand why that would not be an attractive prospect for some people. Have we been putting restrictions in place?
I'm not aware of any restrictions, but I can check, and come back to you. I think that there has to be an acceptance that the market within this area, for some strange reason, isn't there.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Bailey, and then Councillor Dugan.
Just a question picking up there on the response around the opportunities for advertising in schools being explored. I'd be keen to see that coming back to a committee, or at least elected members to have oversight of that, because it does give me concerns, the idea of us advertising in schools if it's done in the wrong way. I'm sure it will be done in a good way that helps our youngsters, but I think hopefully other elected members would support me in saying we'd want to have a look at that before it goes ahead. Thank you.
Absolutely, and obviously you're aware that all proposals for this sort of income generation would be tested first at the member officer working group, but I'm sure that it would then go to the appropriate committee for approval, or for councillors to take a decision on the matter. I don't know if there's anybody who wants to expand on that, Jim.
No, I think you've covered it, Councillor Barrett.
Councillor Dugan.
Thank you, Vice Convener. It's the top of page 114 in Appendix 2, where we look at the review of catering services within our schools. Can I ask what's the inevitable consequence for people employed in production kitchens in schools across Perth and Kinross if we move to a central production unit?
Yeah, I can ask the Deputy Chief Executive to respond to that. I'm not entirely sure that I would describe these as inevitable consequences, but if there's a move to a central processing unit, as far as I understand, that would lead to an increase in jobs and employment at the central processing unit, but that there would be a smaller number of reductions in posts in the school kitchen estate. So I don't know whether Jim Valentine can expand on that.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Yes, as there would be an overall expansion in terms of 36 posts across the whole Tayside area, and people within Perth and Kinross could apply for those jobs. Locally, there'd be a loss of 8.6 posts, 8.6 FTEs, some of which might be part-time posts, but Tayside contracts are confident that they can manage that within the existing turnover that they have.
Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Dugan? No. Okay. Are there any other questions? Councillor Ling.
I was wondering if Tayside contracts are they still looking at sites for the central production unit, or have they got a site chosen, and where would that site be?
I think that the business case is built on the expansion of their Dundee processing unit.
Yes, thank you, Vice Convener. Yes, it is based on the Dundee site. To move it out of Dundee would cost approximately 4 times the capital cost of the project.
Are there any other questions? No. In the moving the report, I want to say that finding new ways of doing things and transforming the services and support that we offer to our local residents continues to be a priority for the Council. The report summarises our progress so far, highlighting the key achievements in those areas that continue to challenge us. The breakdown of projects on target, at risk and requiring remedial action is provided in paragraph 2.2 and in the project status reports in Appendix 2. Highlights include the corporate procurement reform review, which has delivered transformational change in savings and procurement activities through the use of procurement consortia, development of professional procurement skills for staff, and managing demand through respecifying products and services. Key achievements of this reporting period have been achieving a Band 1 assessment as a public body, moving up from Band 3, which puts us in the high performance category. The programme has achieved savings of £2.2 million over the last 2 years, leaving just 300,000 of savings to be identified for this year to achieve the project's 3-year target. Section 3 of the report highlights the collaborative work that is ongoing across Tayside, driven at Chief Officer level across the 3 councils, and prioritising children and young people and families, procurement and commissioning, digital transformation, and the Tay-Cities deal, including a regional approach to economic development. I'm happy to move the recommendations. Are there any amendments, or can we agree the paper? Can you agree the paper? Thank you. Sorry, I thought comments.
Yeah, thank you, Vice Convener. Just very briefly to get back on the point of the central production unit for our school meals. I mean, I accept the assurance from Councillor Valentine, from Mr. Valentine.
He's been relegated.
From Mr. Valentine, although at face value, I do find it very difficult to understand, though, how we can close dozens of production kitchens and the staff that are in there, yet the net job loss will be 8.6. And I think some of that relies excessively heavily on the notion, and it is simply a notion, that people will transfer to a central production unit in Dundee. That's simply not going to work. And I think it removes also the association with preparing meals from our schools, which is unhelpful and not progressive. And I'm also not content either that there aren't significant gender issues related to the inevitable gender complexion of who works in our school production kitchens. And I think that it needs to be much more widely explored, and I'm not happy to see this exported to Dundee.
Thanks for your comments, Councillor Dugan. I don't think anybody is pretending that any of this is easy. There are always difficult decisions and sacrifices to be made within any regional collaborative programme which involves a centralisation. At the heart of that programme, there is a saving of £400,000 to be made. We are constantly preaching about shared services, collaborative working, and driving efficiencies through that process. And there comes a time where we have to walk the walk as opposed to just talking the talk. So, Councillor Bailey.
Just to add support to Councillor Dugan's comments, I agree with everything he said there. I think further to expose the fact that the 8.6 was an FTE number, so that's full-time equivalent staff, because a great many of these staff are on part-time contracts. There will be a great many more people than 8.6 people affected. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Councillor Bailey, and I appreciate that the Councillor Dugan's position is one which he's held for a long time and articulated consistently. Are there any other comments? Councillor Lane.
I agree that we should be looking at shared services. It's just a pity that some of them weren't being shared in Perth from Dundee instead of moving the other way.
Absolutely, Councillor Lane, and I hope we can say watch this space and that future developments will be bringing forward proposals where the jobs are coming to Perth. Thank you. Councillor Donaldson.
I didn't ask any questions, but under 2.5 and 4.2c, I think it's important that, as far as I understand, that we are still looking here at two options. One, either a single trust or is the continuation of the two existing cultural trusts as distinct entities but working together, and hopefully that 40,000 will be included, will be in part to look at ways in which the two trusts can work together going forward. But the one thing I would say on it is, and obviously this is going to come back, I would assume in February, March, maybe I'm wrong, but the impact it has on the morale of staff, both at Horsecross and at Culture PKC and in the libraries. And, it's just been a period of uncertainty, and hopefully we can bring that to an end to help to improve morale.
Absolutely, I would agree with you, Councillor Donaldson. Transformation and change is something that we've always got to handle sensitively and to take our staff with us throughout that process. Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Vice Convener. It's really just a point of clarification on your comment about establishment of shared services and collaboration and the association with centralisation. Centralisation is not the default position of collaboration, and it should not be considered as such. Therefore, there is often a middle way that, in my experience, short experience here with the Council, is never explored fully enough. So I would urge whoever is representing both us as elected members and the officers that they explore fully options that do not necessarily default towards centralisation.
Thanks for that, Councillor McCall. I think the comments that I were made were with regard to the central processing unit for the meal service, and with the regard to the other comments I made, that was with regard to relocation of services from out with Perth to Perth. So, are there any other comments? Okay, can we agree the paper? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. We now move on to paper 8 this morning, which is the Corporate Prosperity Asset Management Transformation Programme. And Mrs. Renton, would you care to introduce for us?
Thank you, Convener. As noted in the previous report, the Council has an agreed Corporate Property Asset Management Transformation Programme with savings of over 3 years of £1.8 million to be achieved. The report deliberately has a long background section covering the two previous property rationalisation projects undertaken by the Council, and that's simply to demonstrate that we have done this type of work before and done it very successfully. Our previous approaches have worked so well due to significant engagement with all those involved and taking difficult decisions. And this has included, for example, investment in this building as part of the Perth office programme, which, despite significant criticism at the time about the cost, is now delivering savings in excess of the anticipated £500,000 a year that we had estimated at the time. The report details the extent of the Council's property portfolio and outlines the key facts relating to these. And while there are key areas outlined in the report to be taken forward in the first instance, the approach of property rationalisation will cover the whole of the Council area. In addition, we will also continue to work with all our partners in a more joined-up way to address property requirements across the whole of the public estate. The key challenges of the project are, quite clearly, that savings are most likely to come from a largest number of small, low-value properties, but very well loved in our communities. And this is a result of the 3-year nature of the programme, which precludes any real opportunities from savings through the Pooler House contract, which comes to an end in 2025. We will continue, however, to explore bringing in additional recurring income from subletting the building, which we are currently doing through organisations as Skills Development Scotland. There are significant interdependencies with the school estate review, but while we need to reinforce that there is absolutely no presumption or foregone conclusion about any schools being closed. Indeed, we also need to recognise that there is an expansion of the school estate through things like the nursery provision. Community asset transfer is an issue ongoing, of which there are a number in the system in terms of requests for our properties. And services are still looking at their future delivery needs, making some of the future thinking hard. And the important role of digitisation and IT to support change and property rationalisation will be key to us moving forward for this. The paper therefore seeks approval for the principles outlined within the report, the governance arrangements and support to progress to deliver the required savings. I'd like to thank Fraser Crofts and Norman Ballantyne in particular, who have done the majority of work in analysing the data and producing the report being discussed this morning. Together, hopefully, we'll be able to answer all your questions.
Okay. Any questions to the report? Councillor Parrott.
Thank you, Convener. I'm on page 124 with regard to the principles. It's always sensible to have principles underlying the way one works, I think, but can someone explain to me exactly what Principle 2 means? This is about saving money while delivering services effectively. I get that bit, but what does people, not properties, mean at the end? Okay. So that the principle is maximising or transferring spend onto people as opposed to unnecessary property.
That's correct.
Okay, Provost Malloy.
Thank you, Kavira. Page 125, 4.1. I think this is a typo. It's the last line. It says appropriate local member. Should that not be local members? Plural.
Yes.
It is, yeah.
No matter how many times we've proofread and read this, then yes, you're correct. Thank you.
Councillor Hearn.
Thank you very much. My question's on page 125, paragraph 4.3, with the somebody answer me what's going to happen possibly to St Martin's House, and I'll possibly have a supplementary depending on the answer.
St Martin's House has a very long lease, and we're, obviously working and co-located with, colleagues from other, organisations such as Police Scotland. What we would be looking at is, sort of again, sort of possibly, sort of bringing in more people to work in St Martin's House. I think that lease runs for another, sort of probably until about 2025 as well. And, sort of but looking at potential lease breaks for that.
Okay, thank you. My second question would have been if we were planning on moving it, but if we're not planning on moving the services that have been out of there, then that's fine.
I think we need to be very clear that, sort of we will take every opportunity that we can to rationalise the services, sort of, and make the most use of the properties that we have, taking into account how we would need to provide services as well, if that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Duggan.
Thanks, Convener. It's the first question, two questions, please. The first question is in the recommendations on page 126. Paragraph 5.1. It's the second recommendation whereby we're asked to endorse the anticipated programme of savings, in particular that of the school estate review. It's just to really understand why that's been, that the school estate review element of it has been emphasised by officers in that way. And the second question, if I can, is, well, it's just a plea really, on page 125, paragraph 4.6, just above, where we've got the Perth City North follow on to the Letham Centre. It says who we'll work with, but it omits elected members, and I would like to see elected members included in that.
No problem with that, absolutely. Okay, the first part of your question.
I was going to be awkward and do the second one. Yes, clearly we would be working with elected members within, sort of the Perth City North proposals. And in reference to the recommendations, I think that what we're just, it goes back to my introduction, is we need some of the work that we're doing is obviously using the school estate review and making sure that we are linking those two bits of work together.
Thanks, Convener. Just to be clear, we need to, because the title is Perth City North, but in the context of the Letham Centre, we need to include colleagues from Perth City South as well.
Okay, happy with that. Okay, thank you. Any further questions, Councillor McEwan?
On section 4.2, I'm aware that the Blairgowrie Rafting Community Council actually undertook a charrette process a few years ago, which in detail talked about the assets within the towns and the aspirations of the community in Blairgowrie and Rattray. Is that type of evidence something that the report group will also absorb into their information to take decisions forward?
Yes, we would.
Okay, to do 11. Okay, yes, I think would be the answer to that, Councillor McEwan. Yes, sorry. Councillor Sheila McCall.
Thank you, Convener. My question is on page 125, section 4.4. I'm a little confused about the structure of the point. The significant piece of work, I'm assuming that's referring to 4.3. Would that be correct?
All of the project, the programme.
The whole entire programme?
Yes, it's the whole programme.
So I have a supplementary, if I may.
Okay.
In terms of the PFI at Puller House that expires in 2025, what is our options at the end of the expiry of the PFI in 2025? And crucially, what is our lead-in time to make a decision on whether or not we continue with that PFI arrangement?
I think we have got a number of options. I would prefer, because of commercial sensitivity, not to discuss them in public. And I'm happy to do this in private with any of the elected members. But I think, sort of, we have a contract with the building, and just don't want to, sort of show our hand a little bit in discussing this.
Excuse me, I'm not asking for you to show your hand. I'm asking what our options are. They should be a matter of public record. I'm not asking for the costs, which is the commercial sensitivity. I would like to know the lead time that we have to do, the cut-off time by which time we need to make a decision, and that will be in the PFI contract.
Well, if you bear with me, the Chief Executive might respond to your question.
Thank you for the question, Councillor McCall. Earlier this week we agreed that we would need to undertake a full options appraisal. Work's already been started on that, so please allow us to come back and answer the question fully in due course.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Braun.
Thank you, Convener. Just my question on page 123, section 2.3, we're ranking the properties to suitability and condition. We mentioned percentages for properties in A and B condition, but nothing on C and D. And I just wonder if we have any in D, particularly in condition where it says unsuitable, life expired, and or serious risk of imminent failure. Do we have any properties in that condition?
I would hope that these things had been addressed, but
the answer is no, we don't. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you. On a connected point, in September last year, I think it's this committee got a report on eyesore buildings and a list of buildings that need repair. Is this committee, and it does link in with this because some of those buildings are council property, is this committee in due course going to get an update on that working group, which I think meets quarterly?
Yes, we can bring a report on that basis on the eyesore buildings.
Just to say, I think that would be helpful, but also you mentioned about bringing in additional income, and that's something we're all looking at. It's something I have mentioned before, but can I get an assurance we are now seriously looking at the possibility of conservation area regeneration scheme funding or CARS schemes?
Yes, so we've been working very closely with the Heritage Trust in relation to that, and also the Ganachie Trust.
All I would just say is, and I declare in a way an interest because I'm involved with the Heritage Trust, but there's no direct thing just now. This is more looking at scaling options. But if one looks at Fife in particular, I think the last scheme in Cooper received $1 million in funding from Historic Environment Scotland. So it really is a significant source of funding for Perth and Kinross for many of our communities. Would you agree?
I would acknowledge that, yes, thank you, Councillor Donaldson. And again, that's a bit of joint working that we want to do with the Heritage Trust and the Ganachie Trust.
Thank you, Councillor Donaldson, for your question. Are there any further questions? Councillor Parrott, I wonder if you could put your microphone off, please. Sorry. Okay, thank you. The purpose of the report is to seek approval for the overarching principles and methodology related to the Corporate Property Asset Management Transformation Programme, along with an overview of the delivery programme. The report is the response to the 1.8 million of savings which were agreed as part of the Council's transformation report. At that time, all elected members were clear that reducing the number of buildings we operate out of is a much better than the alternatives. This would be to scale back significantly on the services that we provide to the people of Perth and Kinross, or to reduce the number of staff that we employ. As you heard already from Mrs. Renton, to put this into context, this would be an annual cost of approximately 40 teachers or 40 social workers or the entire grounds maintenance staff of this council. While it's encouraging to note that almost £800,000 of this saving has already been made, it is clear from the report that delivering the remaining £1 million will not be an easy task. However, as the report outlines, this council has already an excellent track record of delivering property rationalisation programmes. This has been through a strong strategic leadership approach between elected members and officers, combined with taking the difficult decisions and tackling the problems. To support this, the report highlights a number of key principles which will be used to support our overall process, and outlines a number of key areas we would want to progress on quickly. This does not mean that only areas named specifically within the report will be subject to property rationalisation. It is simply to allow a small team to focus on our key priorities and to ensure that the principles are fit for purpose. When opportunities occur to reduce the number of properties I have, these will be considered as part of the review. I am pleased that there will be a community focus to the discussions about the transformation review, but I also acknowledge this will not be an easy task. However, we all have to recognise that times have been changing for a number of years, and with a combination of community empowerment agendas, community asset transfers, reducing council budgets, I know that this is the right thing to do. The mantra for us all has been about protecting posts, not properties, and I'm happy to move the paper. Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Convener. I think in secondly, I just want to say that I think the draft principles are logical and understandable, importantly taking account of settlement and the neighbourhood context. Co-location is critical to reducing the public sector estate while still providing services in the community, both across services and community partners. I welcome the involvement of the Scottish Futures Trust to facilitate a one public service estate workshop, which I hope will be as straightforward as the name on the tin. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. Paper 9 is the Fleet and Mechanical Equipment Assets Annual Status Report. From a previous decision of committee, an annual status report requires to be brought back, and this report presents a status summary of the Council's fleet and mechanical equipment assets as at the 31st of March and describes their current condition and provides an opportunity to confirm that the fleet replacement programme in the asset management plan is in line with current agreed funding. Director Renton, would you like to make any introductory remarks, or shall we move straight to questions? If we can move straight to any questions on the report, please. Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Vice Convener. My question is on the on page 12. Sorry, on the acquisition value of the fleet. I can't remember what page it's on. I'm sorry. Sorry, on page 135, section 2.2. The acquisition value of the fleet. Is that the acquisition value that was, or the projected acquisition value of the fleet in the future?
Mr. Crofts will answer your question.
That's the original cost.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor McCall.
Well, on the opening page, you refer to the gross asset value as being slightly different from the acquisition value, and I'd like to understand why that is.
Need to come back to you on that. Around about £700,000 of a difference. It could be something to do with the accounting adjustments at the end of the year.
And I have one final one supplementary.
And another supplementary, Councillor McCall, please.
It's why do we not use the net book value and use the gross book value?
Mr. Crofts? Or is that a finance question?
Sorry, I'm informed. Depreciated value first. The depreciated value rather than the 1.5 shows the over the life of the asset. Sorry.
I'm sorry. So you're saying that the depreciated value is the value quoted in 1.5, but that's not the gross book value. That's usually the net book value.
We will check that and come back to you.
And I'd be very surprised if the whole fleet is only depreciated by 700,000.
Oh, yeah, that was a comment, Councillor McCall, but that's all right. So Mr. Crofts is going to come back to you on that point. Councillor McCune, you had a question.
And item 2.13 on page 138, it discusses minibuses. Through the community transport initiatives that we've been doing, I'm aware that the ability to drive a minibus with people in it depends on the minibus's size and licensing, where older drivers like ourselves here tend to be able to drive minibuses without extra training, whereas those after a certain year have to sit different driving tests. So obviously going forward, young teachers cannot drive minibuses with children in it unless they have extra provision within their licensing to do that. Does that mean going forward we're going to maintain the same level of investment in a minibus fleet that might actually incur a cost to allow younger drivers to be able, who will not be young by then, to drive them in the first place?
Well, thanks for the question, Councillor McCune. You look like you would fall in the younger category rather than the older one, but I think Director Renton wants to answer the question.
Well, I definitely fall into the older category because I, sort of many years ago, I did my Midas minibus driving test. And I know that the arrangements for that test have, sort of proven harder, as they've tightened them up. I was unaware that there was an age bar to that, so we'll come back to you on that question. Thank you.
there's not an age bar. It's
Councillor Lang, are you? Okay, are there any other questions? Councillor Duff.
Thank you. My question was in relation to 2.12 on page 138, where it talks about reducing external hires. I just wondered if how much we spend on hire vehicles and whether it is actually reducing.
Is that Mr. Croft's question?
Yes, obviously what we try and do is reduce the number of external hires by holding on to spare pool vehicles if possible. So when a vehicle comes to the end of its life, we'll consider that vehicle, rather than selling it or disposing, we will retain as a spare pool, resulting in reduced hires.
Councillor Duff.
No, thank you for that. That's fine.
Okay. Councillor Dugan and then Councillor Parrott.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Just to thank officers for a good report. This is a very important report that comes before us. But good as it is lacking what we used to see, which was a line by line of vehicle usage, because it is a bit one-dimensional for those of us who are not close to the operational coal face to see that, you know, a vehicle on a page, it really very much depends what it does. And we used to see a spreadsheet with vehicle ages and mileages on them, and it was very helpful for elected members to understand how intensely certain vehicle classifications are used and how lightly others are. And I think getting back to one of the issues about minibuses, you know, I think we would all, as elected members, and we see how much our parent councils and schools spend on buses, we would like to be reassured that minibuses are being sweated as much as possible. So the question, Vice Convener, is why do we not have that interesting spreadsheet with all the usage on it?
Mr. Crofts. Yeah, we can make that information available. We do have significant data in our Key2 fleet system, so we can make that available.
Maybe we could circulate it after a committee and include it in subsequent reports, Vice Convener.
Is it okay to circulate that after the committee? Thank you. Councillor Parrott.
Thank you very much, Vice Convener. I note that the table, the asset replacement status table at paragraph 2.5, divides vehicles between green, white and purple. There seems to be an assumption that all vehicles will be replaced on a one-for-one basis. Is there not perhaps good reason to allow for savings in vehicles and reduction in fleet in that table at all? Thank you.
Mr. Croft. Yeah, again, each vehicle in terms of replacements is considered on its own merits and in line with the service requirements. So that will be a consideration as and when each vehicle is due for replacement.
Are there any other questions on the report? No. Okay, so the role of fleet management then is to ensure that the council has the right vehicle, plant and equipment in the right place at the right time and indeed at the right cost. I'm very happy to move this report and unless anybody wants to make a comment or an amendment. Oh, right, okay, in that case I'll seek a seconder first of all.
Happy to second.
Okay, so we've got a seconder. Councillor McCall, you've got a comment to make.
Yes, thank you, Vice Convener. I really just want to endorse further what Councillor Dugan has said about the information that's available in this report. The FAME report last came to committee in 2015, which a lot of councillors sitting in this forum here today were not elected at that point in time, and I have looked on our systems and some of the information actually hasn't really been updated in terms of the literature, so it's very difficult to see what the current status is. So I would really think that in future we do get some background papers attached to these reports that will inform us better, so that when we're considering them, we are fully informed. Thank you.
Director Renton.
Thank you for that comment. You know, sort of, yes, we'll take that into consideration. What I would also like to do is invite any, you know, sort of the elected members who haven't been to see the workshop at Friarton, you know, sort of, and how we manage our fleet and the use of our Key2 system to be able to do that. You're more than welcome, and if you just make that arrangement through Fraser.
Okay. Any other comments? Can we agree the report? Agreed. Thank you.
Thanks, Convener. Report 10 is the data protection policy. The covering report explains why the Council's data protection policy requires to be updated in response to general data protection requirements and the new data protection accountability principle, which has been introduced. I have a feeling we're going to be playing data protection bingo as I give the introduction to this report. The policy exhibits the benefits of being clear and concise. There are 4 paragraphs in the policy relating specifically to elected members. These cover being given access to data to conduct our duties, familiarising ourselves with data protection laws and undertaking required training, our responsibilities as individual data controllers and the Council's as our data processor. Members will have signed new contracts to establish this relationship formally. The policy also describes the responsibilities and independence of the data protection officer. It is essential that the Council has an appropriate data protection policy in order to comply with data protection legislation, and the new policy satisfies the various legal requirements. Are there any questions? Are there going to be any comments? Can we agree to the paper? Thank you.
Moving swiftly on, item 11, which is joint working agreements. And can I ask Karen Donaldson to introduce the paper?
Convener, if I might just amend my previous non-financial declaration of interest to a financial declaration of interest as I'm remunerated by the Board of NHS Tayside on advice of officers.
Okay, thank you. Karen Donaldson.
Thank you. This report is twofold. First of all, it seeks approval of a set of principles which ensures effective governance and supports collaborative and partnership arrangements. Public service reform and a rapidly changing economic climate mean the Council will continue to engage in new service delivery models. And these principles will support the management and monitoring of such arrangements, ensuring that accountability lines are clear and risks are managed effectively. Elected members will of course be the decision makers on any policy or strategy around new service delivery models. However, these proposals mean the Chief Executive would have delegated authority to use these principles to establish effective governance arrangements when developing such new models. Collaboration and partnership takes many forms, and the work in respect of developing a joint working agreement for health and social care showed that there is merit in having certain principles agreed up front to guide future partnership and collaboration. This will help streamline dialogue with future partners. The second aspect of the report seeks approval of the joint working agreement, which is outlined in Appendix 1 for a pilot for a minimum period of 12 months. This agreement will facilitate more effective integration of health and social care services. The joint working agreement itself has been the subject of extensive consultation over the last 3 years with the 4 partner employers across Tayside. That's NHS Tayside, who have employees across the 3 partnerships, which involve Perth Kinross Council, Angus Council and Dundee City Council, along with staff representatives as well. And we have worded the joint working agreement in a way that it will actually cover all 3 partnerships. So the pilot approach has been adopted to allow all the employers to assess the effectiveness of these arrangements in facilitating the new ways of working and managing in an integrated health and social care setting. Employees within the partnership remain employees of either Perth Kinross Council or NHS Tayside. And as the partnership has matured and services have become more integrated, we are seeing that job roles are evolving and that different management arrangements are actually required. And we're at that point now, specifically with occupational therapy. The joint working agreement effectively will allow individual employees in the partnership to manage or to be managed by an individual who's not employed by the same employer as them. So the joint working agreement will safeguard the rights and obligations for employers and employees alike. And that all-round protection afforded by this agreement is welcomed by our trade unions and is regarded as an essential requirement through legal advice from our own Head of Legal and Governance Services. We know that part of working in partnership is cultural, but it's also important that we ensure that there's effective governance that takes account of the employment legislation provisions around that govern our relationships between employees and employers. Thank you.
Very happy to agree, Convener, and I'm very pleased to see this come before SPNR today. It seems to me to be an inevitable consequence of an ambition to deliver integration across health and social care in our communities, and I can't see a way that we could do that effectively and sustainably without going down a route which looks something like this. I take my hat off to Karen and our team in what must be a difficult route to plot, with inevitable concerns from staff, and I'm very hopeful and in fact anticipate that this will deliver a better way of working for our employees in both organisations and very much better outcomes, I'm sure, over time for people that live in Perth and Kinross. Thank you.
No, it's me. Thanks, Convener. This report provides members with an annual progress report in relation to the Council's commitments under the Armed Forces Covenant. The report contains the detail of progress with actions to demonstrate this Council's commitment to the Armed Services Covenant and to supporting veterans and their families and treating them fairly. It is evidenced in practice in things like recognising the housing needs of armed forces personnel leaving full-time regular service within our housing allocations policy as a strategic needs group, and thereby ensuring that they have received sufficient priority to be reached for housing quickly. Importantly, this helps avoid forces personnel having to present as homeless and therefore avoids all the associated stigmas and experience of homelessness. This has included the work we've done has included refreshing the Veterans First Guide, available in both hard copy and online. The guide was launched by the Provost and is made widely available through council offices, libraries, GP surgeries and distributed to councillors. The guide is a directory to support services and agencies, sources of funding support and welfare rights advice, employment and health, covering council, third sector and armed services advice projects and support. Awareness raising work for the Covenant has been done with the development of the Armed Forces Covenant Frontline Workers e-learning module to better ensure that veterans and their families are treated fairly. I commend the report to members and note the positive work undertaken to help support Armed Forces veterans and their families living in Perth and Kinross, and would particularly like to thank my colleague Councillor Hearn for his dedication to his role as our Armed Forces and Veterans Champion. Are there any questions on the report? I'm happy to move it and then open for comments. Are there any comments on the report? Can we agree with the report? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Barrett. We now move to the final item on this morning's agenda, which is a private paper